Hey guys, this is your host Eric. Today we are going to watch action genre movie called Run All Night. Spoilers ahead, turn on your subtitle, I greatly appreciate your support. Enjoy the video. Run All Night follows Jimmy Kinlan, a former Irish mob enforcer who has retired and become an emotionally unstable alcoholic. Jimmy used to work for a crime lord named Sean Maguire, who is also Jimmy's closest friend and the only person who cares about Jimmy after everyone else, including his family, abandons him. Jimmy Kinlan has a son named Mike. Mike is a limo driver and retired professional boxer who mentors at-risk children at the local gym. Mike, tired of his father's actions and his work as a hitman, refuses to refer to Jimmy as his father or involve him in his daughter's lives. Jimmy is going to meet Danny, Sean's son, one night to borrow some money. When he arrives at Danny's house, he notices two police officers taking bribes from Danny, which Danny and his father frequently do to hide their illegal activities. When Jimmy meets Danny, he appears to be annoyed by Jimmy's presence, as Jimmy is constantly borrowing money from his father. Danny refuses to lend him money after retiring unless he is willing to do something for him. So Danny asks Jimmy to be Santa Claus at his house's Christmas celebration because he desperately needs money. Danny's request forces Jimmy to comply. Following that, Danny meets with his father, Sean, and the Albanian gangsters to discuss heroin sales, during which Sean flatly refuses the gangsters' offer to allow the sale of Albanian heroin in Sean's territory. The Albanian gangsters demand Danny return the money after being disappointed by Sean's refusal. They paid Danny to set up a meeting and negotiate with Sean because the sum was not insignificant. They threatened Danny with death and gave him until tomorrow, if Danny was unable to return them. However, Danny informs them that he will persuade his father to accept the gangsters' offer. Danny returns to his father after the Albanian gangsters have left, and they have a heated argument because Sean is adamant that he will not accept the gangsters' offer. The scene then shifts to Mike practicing boxing in a boxing gym with one of his students, Legs, a young man who records Mike's training after training. Mike is hired to transport two clients to a location, one of whom is the Albanian gangster who previously met with Danny at Sean's house. The Albanian gangsters request that Mike drive them to Danny's house. They had changed their minds and were going to collect the money from Danny tonight. When the Albanian gangsters arrive at Danny's place, they are enraged when the man taunts them by handing them a pile of play money. A gunfight ensues, and Danny manages to kill one of them after seeing his comrade die. The man attempted to flee the house, but Danny pursues him and shoots him outside the house, killing him. Mike, who was waiting in his car, witnessed the incident, as did Legs, who accidentally recorded the shooting with his cell phone camera. Danny, who had noticed Mike's presence, approached the man and pointed a gun at him, while Legs managed to hide in front of Danny. Danny takes Mike to his house with the intent of killing him there, but Mike immediately fights back and eventually escapes. Danny and his henchmen then pursue Mike, but he escapes by jumping over the fence. Danny, on the other hand, manages to steal Mike's wallet and obtain his identity and home address when he returns home. Mike immediately called his wife, who was visiting his sister and mom. Mike asked his wife to stay and not go home for the sake of everyone's safety. Mike is aware that he is in trouble with Danny. Jimmy goes to his son's house and asks Mike not to report the murder on Sean's orders. Danny turned himself into the police last night. Mike has refused to let his father into his home because he still despises him. But Jimmy breaks into Mike's house and tries to persuade his son to obey Sean's orders for the sake of both of them and Mike's family's safety, because Jimmy doesn't want them all killed. Mike, on the other hand, continues to refuse and will report Danny to them. When Jimmy is about to leave for home, he notices Danny's car parked nearby. So Jimmy rushes back to Mike's house and discovers that Danny had pointed a gun at Mike and was about to murder his son without thinking. Jimmy shot Danny immediately, killing him. Jimmy then calls Sean to inform him of Danny's death, explaining that he had no choice but to kill Danny because Danny was about to murder his son. Sean became enraged upon hearing this and demanded that life be paid for life, which he vowed to kill. A panicked Mike, on the other hand, grabbed the phone to call the police, but Jimmy stopped him because it would only make matters worse. Mike, who is irritated by his father's reckless behavior, then evicted Jimmy from his home. Mike then dialed 911 to report that his father had just killed a man at his home. The report was intercepted by Sean, who then dispatched a henchman to Mike's. Sean dispatches two corrupt cops to apprehend Mike and murder him. Then you corner Mike and arrest him for murder. Jimmy, on the other hand, sees his son being led away by two corrupt cops he met while visiting Danny's office while standing outside Mike's house. Jimmy then pursued the officer who had brought Mike and previously crashed his car in the middle of the highway. The police car eventually lost control and crashed. Jimmy rushes to save Mike, who is handcuffed in the backseat, and shoots one of the corrupt cops, killing him and removing Mike from the scene. Sean, on the other hand, sends his henchmen, led by a man named Frank, to kill Mike. After the collision, Frank and his men tracked down Jimmy and Mike's whereabouts and discovered that they had gone to Jimmy, on the other hand, managed to finish them all off. Sean then orders his henchmen to clean up the mess at Danny's house, using Mike as a scapegoat. Sean then orders his men to put the bodies of the Albanian gangsters into Mike's car, making Mike the prime suspect in the murder, and mobilizes all of his men to find Jimmy and Mike elsewhere across the country. Mike's wife, Gabrielle, is watching a live television broadcast about Mike and Jimmy being suspects in a murder case and being sought by police. Jimmy then requests that Mike return with his family and remain hidden until he contacts him. Jimmy then contacts Detective Harding, a police officer who has been unable to prove Jimmy's involvement in the Albanian gang's murder. Harding informs Jimmy that eyewitnesses claim Mike, not Danny, was the shooter. Jimmy then strikes a deal with Harding in which he promises to prove Mike's innocence and turn himself in with a list of everyone he killed during his Mafia career. After that, Jimmy apologizes to Sean and begs Mike not to get involved in their problem, but Sean refuses because Jimmy killed his son. Sahan has the right to seek redress. Jimmy informs Sean that Danny intends to murder and threatens to inform the police about Sean's previous crimes. Sean, who is unconcerned about Jimmy's threats, then claims that the police are uninterested in the information Jimmy has on him. Sean then threatens Jimmy with murdering Mike and his family in retaliation. After hearing the threat, Jimmy goes to Mike and his family and sends Mike's family to a secluded cabin for safety. While Jimmy and Mike rush to Leg's apartment to capture video footage of Danny's Albanian gangster shooting to prove that he is not the murderer as reported in the media. Elsewhere, Sean hires a professional assassin named Andrew Price to kill Jimmy and Mike, as well as their families, after discovering his son's body. When Jimmy and Mike visit Lake's apartment building, one of the apartment residents apparently notices them and recognizes them as fugitives, so the woman immediately reports their whereabouts to the police. Soon after, police arrive to take the occupants of the apartment to a safe. Price, who was also present, then turned off the power in the entire building. Jimmy and Mike then take advantage of the opportunity to mingle with the residents of the apartment complex that is being evacuated. Even in the dark, Price can figure out where Jimmy and Mike are. To cut a long story short, Jimmy and Mike eluded the cops and fled. Jimmy also manages to immobilize Price, despite being severely injured by Price's. A fatal shot is fired, striking him in the hand. Jimmy and Mike were furious after that and went to Jimmy's brother Eddie's house. Eddie then informs Mike that Jimmy is only loyal to Sean, and that Jimmy murdered his own cousin to prevent him from testifying against Sean, and that he would do the same to Mike. Mike was disgusted and disappointed in his father after hearing this, and he refused to trust him, and returned to his family in search of a solution to the blood feud. Jimmy then calls Sean and asks him to stop targeting Mike and his family, threatening to kill Sean if he continues to do so. Sean, on the other hand, ignored Jimmy's threat and hung up. Jimmy has already arrived at Sean's hideout and is prepared to kill him. Legs goes to the police station and finds Detective Harding handing over the video of Danny's murder of the Albanian gangster, and Harding checks the ballistics on Danny's gun to confirm. Meanwhile, Mike travels to a remote cabin to meet with his family. Then he calls Detective Harding to tell him where he is because Mike intends to turn himself in. Soon after, Jimmy visits Mike and his family and informs them that Sean has died and that everything is now over, allowing Mike and his family to live in peace. Mike appears relieved to hear all of this and finally introduces Jimmy to his granddaughters for the first time. But then Price, who appears to be alive, appears and attacks the cabin, fatally shooting. Jimmy then goes after Mike and his friends. Price briefly cornered Mike, but Jimmy kills Price just before he shoots Mike. When the police arrive, Detective Harding informs him that he has received video footage of the Albanian gangster murders, proving that Mike is not the perpetrator and thus acquitting Mike of all charges. Detective Harding said this to Mike and Jimmy just before Jimmy died while holding his list of previous victims for Harding. Despite their lack of closeness, Mike appeared sad and devastated when his father died because, at the end of his life, his father had sacrificed everything to save himself and his family. Mike returns to work as a boxing coach and driver in the epilogue and lives a happy life with his wife and 2 daughters. Mike looks downcast as he looks at a photo of himself with his father before leaving for work. We really appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel with the notification bell because it is really important for us. Thank you.